In this lesson, we'll answer 3 questions. What are nation-state actors? Where did they come from? And how do they operate today? We'll actually start way back in World War I, move through World War II and the Cold War, and finish with modern APTs, supply chain compromises, and real CVEs tied to specific states. First, let's address that question of what we mean by nation-state actors. A nation-state actor is a team operating with direction, funding, or protection of a government, often under an intelligence or military organ. Their missions align to national objectives: espionage, intellectual property theft, disruption of critical infrastructure, influence operations, and sometimes direct financial generation to bypass sanctions. They differ from criminals by scale, persistence, and strategic goals. So if we go back to phase 1, World War I, where intelligence becomes industrial. World War I is where information warfare became a state system. Britain's Room 40 industrialized interception and decryption. The classic example is the Zimmerman telegram in 1917. This exposure helped shift U.S. policy toward entering the war. The point isn't just the one telegram, it's that the government stood up dedicated intercept and code-breaking bureaus and integrated them into strategy. We have phase 2, World War II. Cryptanalysis is driving early computing. The well-known part of UK, US, and Germany is where Germany fielded Enigma and later teleprinter systems. Breaking them became an Allied priority. At Bletchley Park, Allied cryptanalysis built electromechanical bombs and then Colossus, among the first programmable electronic computers, to automate specific code-breaking workflows. 10 colossi were in use by the war's end. But there's a lot more information here than is just typically on the mainstream. Poland, Bureau Cyfrów. The Polish Cipher Bureau is the first part I'll mention. In 1932, Marian Rejewski, Jerzy Ruzicki, and Henryk Zygalski, 3 brilliant Polish mathematicians, laid the mathematical foundations for breaking Enigma. They mathematically reconstructed Enigma's wiring, created the cyclometer, a device used to catalog Enigma permutations, as well as Zygalski sheets and the Bomba Cryptologiczna. In July 1939, they handed methods and replicas to French and British services, which laid crucial groundwork for Bletchley's scale-up. Now we have France. French intelligence, Deuxième Bureau, ran agent Haché, Hans Thilo Schmidt, who supplied Enigma materials. After 1939, PC Bruno near Paris, and later, Cadi, operated with Polish, French, and Spanish teams decrypting Axis traffic and liaising with Bletchley. We have Sweden. In 1940, mathematician Arne Boerling cracked the German Geheimfernschreiber, literally secret remote writer, which was a teleprinter cipher system Sweden broke independently during World War II. This T-52 teleprinter link they broke by hand in about 2 weeks, giving Sweden high-grade intelligence and seeding FRA's cryptologic tradition. You have Finland. Finnish SIGINT repeatedly broke Soviet field systems during the Winter and Continuation Wars, using traffic analyses with captures, which was an Eastern Front intelligence force multiplier. We have Commonwealth and allies in the Pacific. Australia and New Zealand, the Central Bureau Brisbane, and Frumel Melbourne jointly worked Japanese traffic with the US, UK, Canadian, Dutch colleagues. NZ ran key intercept stations feeding the theater. You have Delhi in India. The Wireless Experimental Center, WEC, near Delhi served as a Bletchley outpost, breaking Japanese systems like Army Water Transport Code and handling Burma theater comms. Switzerland and Sweden for industry, Boris Hagelin's rotor machines like C-38 and M209 became mass-issued Allied ciphers. The U.S. Army fielded M209 widely, and industrial cipher engineering, often from neutral countries, shaped tactical comms worldwide. And then you have Japan and USSR as operators. Japan ran its own intercept cryptanalytic units with mixed results. The USSR's disciplined use of one-time pads showed that when implemented correctly, some traffic was mathematically secure. And Allied success against Soviet traffic decades later with Venona, the code name for the long-running US, later UK, Australia, etc. project decrypting Soviet communications during and after World War II, came from operational mistakes, not algorithmic weaknesses. So World War II establishes the blueprint still used today. State-led fusion of math, machinery, intercept networks, and procedures, what we now call SIGINT and comment, with computing at its core. And then post-1945, the UK-USA Five Eyes framework, US, UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand formalized global SIGINT sharing. In parallel, Venona exploited rare Soviet one-time pad key reuse, enabling decryption of segments of KGB GRU traffic, proof that operational discipline is as decisive as math. This era also transitions from radio telegraph to computer-mediated communications and network exploitation, setting conditions for cyber operations. Now, if we look at the post-Cold War to the 2010s, we have connected targets and weaponized code. Commercial IT, the public internet, and enterprise software introduced globally shared dependencies. Nation-states moved from classic espionage to pre-positioning and sabotage. Stuxnet in 2010 was a landmark operation that used multiple zero days, famously .lnk CVE 2010-2568, against Windows, and targeted Siemens ICS environments involved in Iran's nuclear program, widely attributed to the US and Israel in open sources. Beyond espionage, this was surgical physical disruption via code. Information operations, state-scaled online influence like Russia's Internet Research Agency and GRU were later indicted for 2016 US election interference activities, illustrating how cyber intel and propaganda interlock. Then we have 2014 to present. We have APT ecosystems, that's advanced persistent threats, supply chains, and living off the land. In Russia, we've got the Sandworm GRU unit 74455 linked to Ukraine power grid disruptions in 2015 and 2016. NotPetya in 2017, Global Wiper, and Olympic Destroyer, US DOJ, indicted 6 GRU officers in 2020. TTPs include ICS tradecraft and destructive malware as strategic coercion. So TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures, a framework used in cybersecurity, especially in threat intelligence, to describe how adversaries operate. And it comes from military doctrine, adopted by MITRE ATT&CK and other cyber threat frameworks. The tactics are the high-level goals of the adversary, like initial access, lateral movement, and impact. Techniques, the general methods used to achieve that goal, spear phishing, exploiting a VPN, a virtual private network, deploying malware, and procedures are the specific implementations, the actual code, commands, or tools used in an attack, like the CVE 2021-26855 on Microsoft Exchange to achieve initial access. ICS tradecraft stands for industrial control systems like power grids, water treatment, and manufacturing systems. ICS tradecraft means the specialized knowledge and methods attackers develop for operating inside and manipulating industrial systems. SCADA protocols, PLCs, that's programmable logic controllers, historian databases, and so on. An example would be Sandworm, the GRU unit, writing malware like Indestroyer, and crash override to talk directly to power grid control software. Destructive malware is code designed not just to steal data, but to wipe, disable, or destroy systems. Strategic coercion means using it as a form of state pressure or intimidation. Got an example of Russia's NotPetya in 2017, nominally ransomware, but engineered to irreversibly wipe disks, causing billions in global damage. Another, the Shamoon wiper, which was Iran-linked against Saudi Aramco. So what we're saying is, when we say TTPs include ICS tradecraft and destructive malware as strategic coercion, that this actor, Sandworm, doesn't just do ordinary hacking. Their tactics, techniques, and procedures involve specialized expertise in industrial control systems like attacking power grids. And they use malware intended to destroy systems as a tool of geopolitical pressure, not for money, but to send a message or destabilize. Now we have APT-28, Fancy Bear, is routinely routinely exploits edge devices. CISA documents use of CVE 2017-6742 on Cisco routers for footholds. And we have APT 29, Cozy Bear, Nobilium, the SolarWinds supply chain compromise. In 2020, deep software build intrusion, token abuse, and cloud pivoting, which are archetypal modern espionage. We're going to China, APT 1 PLA Unit 61398, publicly outed by Mandiant in 2013 as a long-running IP theft operation, one of the earliest detailed exposures with robust IOCs. And when we say robust IOCs, it means that Mandiant didn't just accuse APT1, they published a large set of indicators of compromise, such as IP addresses, domain names, malware hashes, and command and control servers linked to the group. These technical fingerprints allowed other defenders worldwide to check their own logs and confirm whether they'd been targeted. That level of detail set a new standard for threat intelligence reporting at the time. And then APT 41 Double Dragon, indicted 2020 for a mixed espionage financial campaign spanning software supply chains and global industries. We have Volt Typhoon 2023 onward, focused on pre-positioning in U.S. critical infrastructure with living off the land techniques and router VPN exploitation, less malware, more abusive built-ins, and repeatedly warned in joint U.S. government advisories. And then Iran, APT 33, Holmium is the Microsoft codename for APT 33, and Peach Sandstorm is Microsoft's newer naming convention for Iranian state-backed actor activity that overlaps with APT 33 and Holmium. Had wiper operations in the Gulf region. A wiper is a type of malware designed to irreversibly destroy data on infected systems. Unlike ransomware, which encrypts files and demands payment for decryption, a wiper's intent is destruction, not profit. It overwrites or corrupts files, partitions, or the master boot record so systems can't boot and data can't be recovered. Classic examples of these were Shamoon and NotPetya. And when we talk about in the Gulf region, we're talking about the Persian Arabian Gulf area, particularly oil and gas producers like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, and the UAE. This region has been a prime target for Iranian-linked wiper malware, especially aimed at the energy sector. The vendor and research community tie Shamoon waves to Iranian sponsorship or alignment. And then you have broad exploitation of Fortinet SSL VPN and Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities for initial access, as declared per the FBI and CISA joint advisory. Then we have North Korea. Lazarus from Sony Pictures 2014 to WannaCry 2017 via Eternal Blue, which you can find more details on in CVE 2017-0144, and sustained cryptocurrency theft operations to fund the regime. So we look at patterns here: supply chain SolarWinds to subvert trust routes, edge device exploitation like routers, VPNs, and firewalls, cloud identity abuse like tokens, OAuth, and M365, and wipers and ICS tradecraft for coercion like NotPetya and the Indestroyer families. Across states, missions cluster into espionage with long-term persistence, disruption with wipers and ICS, financial generation like DPRK crypto theft, and influence with coordinated info ops. The philosophy is consistent with the 20th century precedent. Information dominance extends national power. Alliances and proxies complicate attribution since states increasingly use contractors and fronts to create deniability. So you can't always tie everything effectively to who done it, right? But it gives you a good understanding of what state-sponsored or nation-state actors when you hear these terms and how prolifically they are involved in these cyber attacks. And this is only scratching the surface, honestly. If we want to connect directly, we have a lot of CVEs that can be directly connected to these nation-state attacks. CVEs do stand for common vulnerabilities and exposures, and it's simply a unique identifier given to the publicly known cybersecurity vulnerability. So you can think of CVEs like serial numbers for security holes. They make sure the global security community is talking about the same flaw, even if multiple vendors or researchers write about it differently. When a vulnerability is discovered, a CVE numbering authority, the acronym for which is CNA, such as Microsoft, Oracle, Google, or MITRE, assigns it a CVE ID. The CVE entry includes a brief description of the vulnerability, affected products, and references like vendor advisories or research write-ups. Severity is not in the CVE itself. That's tracked in related scoring systems like CVSS, which stands for Common Vulnerability Scoring Systems. In 1999, the CVE program was launched by MITRE Corporation with support from the US government. The goal was to eliminate confusion when different security advisories were talking about the same bug. In the 2000s, vendors and security products began integrating CVE IDs into their advisories and scanners, making it an industry standard. From 2016 onward, the program was expanded into the CVE Numbering Authority (CNA) system, allowing major vendors, Microsoft, Red Hat, Apple, and so on, to assign CVEs directly. And today, the CVE list is maintained by MITRE, today in 2025, in partnership with CNAs worldwide, and it's a globally recognized naming standard for vulnerabilities. So there's a lot of different CVEs that you can look up and find nation-state influence involved in these exploits of the vulnerabilities that have happened worldwide. For example, you could look up CVE 2010-2568, which was part of the Stuxnet kill chain against Windows hosts and later widely reused. Or you could look up CVE 2017-0144, which was Eternal Blue. It's an SMB exploit leaked from NSA, used at global scale in WannaCry with attribution to DPRK and US-UK statements. If you want to look up the most recent ones, you can look up 2025 CVEs that were exploited by nation-state actors. We've got CVE 2025-49704 and CVE 2025-49706, 704 associated with remote control execution, and 706 spoofing, where Chinese state-sponsored groups, including Linen Typhoon, Violet Typhoon, and Storm 2603, actively exploited these SharePoint on-premise vulnerabilities as 0 days. That's in the news like crazy right now here in August 2025, and people are being exploited every day. New exploits are being detected, some of which are attributed to the nation states, but not all, because with this latest SharePoint exploit, just about every hacking group has gotten on board. And targets include government agencies and critical infrastructure sectors and more. We have CVE 2025-53770, which was the deserialization in SharePoint, and CVE 2025-53771 patch bypass. So real quickly, deserialization. When you think about serialization and deserialization, the simplest way to think of it is like data being packed up for serialization and data being unpacked for deserialization. So just think of unpacking your bags after you've gone on an airline flight, let's say, and you've left your bag unattended in the airport beforehand, and somebody got something into that bag so that when you unpack that bag, you have a nasty surprise. And that's what's being allowed through these weaknesses in Microsoft's code. Now, the patch bypass is because the issue that is now being exploited was actually discovered quite a while ago in a pawn-to-own competition, and Microsoft put out a patch once they were aware of the issues, but their patch only covered one path, one method of exploiting the vulnerability that exists, and it did not fix the vulnerability at all. So when they put out their patch, the various cyber criminals were able to look at that patch, see what it was for, and see that it was pathetically unacceptable, that Microsoft hadn't done any extra work to really address the issue. And so everybody jumped on board to exploit this issue that was still remaining that Microsoft knew about before all of this happened. So these vulnerabilities were used in a broad campaign dubbed Tool Shell, enabling remote code execution and unauthorized access in SharePoint environments. The attacks impacted over 400 organizations, including agencies like the U.S. National Nuclear Security Administration, and Chinese-linked APT groups were implicated, among many. You could look at CVE 2025-31324, the SAP NetWeaver unauthenticated file upload, supposedly exploited by China Nexus APTs targeting critical infrastructure. This vulnerability allowed full control over NetWeaver systems via remote code execution and advanced intrusion vector, of course, or CVE 2025-22457, the Avanti Connect Secure VPN Buffer Overflow, which is actively exploited by Chinese cyber espionage group UNC 5221. After patch release in early 2025, attackers hackers crafted exploits for older versions, deploying payloads like Trailblaze and Memory Dropper and Bushfire, which was a backdoor. Now, just to make sure you know, a backdoor is a hidden method of bypassing normal authentication or security controls to gain access to a system. Its purpose is to give an attacker, or sometimes even a developer, a secret way in, often without the user's knowledge. It can be intentionally built in, malicious, or a leftover debug account. It could be installed by malware after compromise. It could be embedded in hardware, firmware, or software updates. So there's a big risk with backdoors, as they let attackers maintain persistent covert access, meaning even if you patch the original vulnerability or change passwords, they can still get back in. Nation-state groups often deploy backdoors after exploiting a vulnerability so that they can return later without needing to exploit the same vulnerability again. So for defenders, the lesson is not patch faster, it's a strategy. Treat identity, build pipeline trust, and edge devices as tier 0 assets. Now, tier 0 assets in cybersecurity, especially in Microsoft Active Directory and identity security contexts, tier 0 assets are the most critical systems and identities in your environment. They call them the crown jewels. They are the resources that, if compromised, would give an attacker complete control over the enterprise. And monitor for living off the land behaviors. And when we say living off the land behaviors, talking about watching for attackers abusing legitimate built-in tools that are already present in the environment, instead of bringing in obvious malware. Examples are PowerShell running encoded scripts, or remote download commands like invoke web request to pull payloads, WMI, Windows Management Instrumentation, using WMIC for remote process execution or lateral movement, certutil.exe, normally for managing certificates but abused to download files or base64 decode payloads, rundll32.exe, used to execute malicious DLLs in memory while looking like a normal Windows process, mshta.exe, abused to launch malicious HTML application HTA scripts, and psexec and SMB, remote service creation with legitimate sysinternals admin tools. The key idea is that attacker blends in by using what admins already use. So instead of hunting for just malware signatures, defenders should monitor unusual usage of these native tools like PowerShell spawning from Word or certutil reaching out to the internet. And also inventory your third-party dependencies. So this means to keep a complete, up-to-date list of all the software libraries, frameworks, plugins, APIs, and vendor products that your system and applications rely on. These components are often not written by you. They're third-party code or services your environment depends on. Attackers increasingly exploit weaknesses in these dependencies with partially supply chain attacks. So if you don't know what you're using, you can't patch or defend it. And many nation-state operations exploit flaws in dependencies before organizations realize they're vulnerable. You've got the examples in 2021, Log4Shell, CVE 2021-44228, a flaw in the open source Log4j Java library used by thousands of apps. You've got compromised GitHub Actions, a popular third-party GitHub action. TJ Actions changed files was exploited this year to leak secrets such as access tokens and private keys. A related action, ReviewDog action-setup at V1, was also compromised. Both vulnerabilities are now listed in SICE's known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. You got the Python JSON logger this year, RCE via missing dependency, which is a logging library exposing users to remote code execution from December 2024 to March 2025. And it occurred because a dependency name, message spec Python 313 pre, was deleted and could be claimed by anyone, allowing attacker-controlled execution when that dependency was installed. In December 2024, you have the Kong Ingress controller, malicious Docker image upload. The official Docker Hub image for Kong's Kubernetes Ingress controller was replaced with a cryptojacking version after maintainer's Docker Hub token was compromised. Developers reported unusually high CPU usage when running version 3.4.0. well. This year also the critical buffer issue in Point Cloud Library, PCL. It was found in the zlib code within PCL where improper pointer arithmetic could lead to memory corruption. And that example showcased how indirect dependencies like bundled libraries carry real risk. Also this year, Tomcat partial put RCE, a remote code execution flaw in Apache Tomcat's partial put feature, became public in March 2025. Though the exploitation conditions are uncommon, a working proof of concept exists, and successful exploit attempts have been recorded in the wild. Last year, the xzutils backdoor, supply chain backdoor in Linux compression tool, and this is actually an interesting one, but in early 2024, malicious code was injected into the widely used xz compression utility, enabling remote code execution via SSH. It was quickly discovered and patched, but several copies of the Fedora Linux system were affected, and it underscored how even deep down libraries can be targeted. Now that one's particularly interesting because it was also attributed to the Chinese nation state via a guy, I think his name was Jean Tran, who had just acted like he was a cool coder, got involved in the Linux open source community, hung out for 3 years helping out, and then slipped in the binary code into the tarball. It's the unactivated code that was then sent out to the developers and so on, that then, when everything was put together, was activated. It's a good story. It's interesting if you start researching it, just to help you to realize there's really no way to protect against some of these things as far as beforehand, because anybody who's got great skills and gets along with people can get in, and you think just 3 years, that's all it took. And it probably wouldn't have taken that long to gain confidence to become a trusted developer so that anything that your code does is considered trusted. And the way he did it, it wouldn't have been caught by any scans because it wasn't activated until after distribution, it would become activated. So it's good to know about these different things. It can be anybody. It didn't have to be a Chinese state actor. It could be anybody in any country of any nationality who's just seems like a real good guy or gal or whatever and has mad skills. And they just wait for their time to insert the malicious code and spread it worldwide. And then you have malicious NPM packages in early 2024, where SSH key stealer and Mimikatz attackers uploaded NPM packages that mimicked legitimate names like typo squatting, containing code to steal SSH keys or launch Mimikatz. Developers installing these dependencies unintentionally compromised developer environments, which then spreads out as well. So it's extremely important to know what third-party dependencies you have in your organization, and that can be more difficult to track than you might think, especially with the Microsoft 365 ecosystem, where there are just like thousands of apps that might just be automatically allowed if your configuration of your system isn't blocking this. And it's also important to assume the long dwell adversaries would have this multi-vector access. Let's talk a little bit about that. Long dwell means attackers may stay inside a network for months or even years without being detected. Nation-state actors in particular are known for this kind of persistence. They don't smash and grab necessarily. Instead, they establish a stealthy foothold and quietly collect intelligence or wait for the right moment. Hafnium, for example, exploited Microsoft Exchange in 2021 and maintained long-term access through web shells, even after the initial patching. You have to build detection and responses as if attackers are already inside, not just focus on preventing entry. And multi-vector means adversaries don't just rely on only one door in, they're going to use multiple simultaneous access paths. Initial exploitation, dumped hashes, phishing, multi-factor authentication fatigue, persistence even if patches are applied, living off the land techniques using PowerShell and WMI to blend in, and other methods, and third-party supply chains compromising software updates or continuous integration and continuous development environment CI/CD systems. In the Volt Typhoon campaigns, actors used compromised edge devices like routers and firewalls and living off the land techniques to maintain parallel access routes. So if you think, oh, I got them, I found one thing that they've done, or I found one door that they're in, and you think that that's your success, think again. So closing one hole doesn't mean the adversary is gone. They may likely have already established multiple footholds, especially with the nation state group. They're going to try to make sure they have established multiple footholds and can just come back through another channel. So nation state actors are not just another type of hacker. They're the culmination of more than a century of governments using technology to gain information superiority. From the code breakers of World War I to the invention of modern computing at Bletchley Park in World War II to Cold War signals, intelligence alliances, the foundations were laid for today's advanced persistent threats. Modern groups, whether the well-known about Russian, Chinese, Iranian, or North Korean, or any others, continue this lineage with long-term espionage, destructive wipers, and sophisticated supply chain compromises. The through line is clear. Nation states use cyber as a strategic weapon. And to defend effectively, of course, understanding the history, anticipating the persistence, and recognizing that the operations are not isolated incidents, but a part of a long evolution of state power in the digital domain is an important aspect of really understanding what are these nation state actors and what is that threat.